Welcome to Business Line's State of the Economy podcast, where you'll find insight, analysis, and the story behind the numbers.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Business Line State of the Economy podcast. Today, we have with us Rahul Prithiani, who is the Global Head for Energy and Sustainability Consulting at the CRISIL Market Intelligence and Analytics. Rahul heads the BFSI, energy, commodities, metals, real estate, and healthcare-related verticals, amongst others, of consulting at CRISIL Market Intelligence and Analytics. An alumnus of the Columbia Business School in New York, from where he pursued his executive program in management, Rahul has more than 20 years of experience in shaping thoughts and leading teams in areas of industry research, company analysis, strategy formulation, sustainability, and capital markets. He pursued his bachelor's degree in computer engineering from the University of Mumbai and a postgraduate degree in business administration from the Great Lakes Institute of Management, Chennai. Today, we will discuss with Rahul the financial and investment aspects related with India's infrastructure push, particularly in the sectors of power and surface transport. Recently, CRISIL released an expensive report on India's infrastructure growth and future prospects, including investments. We will also discuss with Rahul on the availability of long-term funding in these projects and the challenges that lie ahead. Rahul, thank you so much for sparing time to join our program and discuss about the key fault lines in India's infrastructure journey. Would you like to start with who's watching this space for almost 2 decades? What has changed, Rahul?
Thank you for that warm introduction. I think we all being stakeholders in the overall growth of the country in the infrastructure space, I think it's a very critical role to play. At least our expectation is over the next 6-7 years, India is expected to grow in the region of 6 to 7%, which would mean a need for a extensive infrastructure build out. And typically what we've observed is there is a GDP multiplier of close to 2.5 times in as far as infrastructure is concerned to contribute to the overall economy. Asked, what has changed over the last 8 to 10 years? I think what we have seen is gradual acceleration in terms of spending from the government side. There has been a lot of, sector-specific policy activity also that we see in various sectors, which is again kind of, led to relatively faster execution of projects, though, we can always do better. So there has been an improvement in the pace of execution. Then second key change that has happened is the scale of projects. So we are having many large mega scale projects, be it the giga factories, the large airports of over 120 million passenger capacity, then large expressways. So the ambition and the size has also increased, and it will require continued efforts to kind of work on policy related issues to make sure with the changing environment and with the advent of green sustainable finance and the need for sustainability to kind of continuously evolve the regulatory and the policy environment for this sector.
Brilliant description. My takeaway from this would be the scale and the ambition and size of the projects have increased in the last 2 decades. And that's a great reflection. And this, brings me to the question on where CRISIL's Infrastructure Yearbook 2023, where you projected, that between fiscal years 2024 and 2030, the energy and transport and investments would be to the tune of rupees 46 lakh crores. So which is a whopping 183% over the investments that have come between 2017 and 2023 financial years. Basically, what you were explaining about ambition and size, does it aptly reflect over here in the numbers that you published?
Yeah, I think it's very clear in terms of scale, ambition, and as we move towards being a 5 to 6 trillion economy by the turn of the decade, we will see as well as we will need a larger investment in infrastructure, and energy and transportation being two very, very key elements in the entire piece. As you know, if you look at the energy space, the power sector is expected to see a demand growth of over close to 6% or so over the next 5 to 7 years, which is a fairly large number. And given that, we have to move towards green energy, that will have a very, very important role to play. Along with that, in the power sector, we also have this issue of grid integration with respect to the transmission for the renewable energy, with respect to upgradation of the transmission lines, setting up green energy corridors, and also on the distribution side, improving the efficiency with respect to AT&C losses reduction, and also smart metering related solutions. So all these will require significant investments. Additionally, there is also the point of providing around the clock renewable energy, which will again need storage, be it pump storage as well as battery energy storage, where we are likely to add close to 30 gigawatts of capacity. So which will again be a very important factor in the overall piece. And on the transportation side, I think the demand continues to be fairly robust. In most segments, we are seeing demand in the region of 8 to 10%, where again you have investments that are expected to increase substantially, especially on the EV charging infrastructure, battery manufacturing, and pure play, just augmentation of the capacity that is needed in these spaces. And also there is a manufacturing element with respect to the PLIs, both for module manufacturing as well as the entire EV value chain. So all these will require significant investment, and that's what is likely to account for the 46 lakh crore of investment in energy and transport for the next few years till 2030.
Just to break down these sectors, and if we take the power sector first, and aptly brought out by you on transmission and distribution, the Achilles heel of the sector, unless until we get up with both these transmission and distribution, larger reforms in the power sector won't be possible. But if we break down power sector and we look at the renewable sector, you meet analysts, government officials, company officials across the spectrum, across the world. In your conversations with all these people and in your consulting side, do you see a change in the outlook of investors when they're looking at India for investment? I mean, if we look at 7 years back, India has always been, blamed for policy paralysis or shifting of policies or, things, bureaucratic red tape. Are all those things now coming down? Are investors looking at India more optimistically? What do you see in your conversations with, analysts, company officials and all?
So I think it's very clear in our conversations from most people, the investor confidence is a lot higher than what we used to see earlier. Primarily, again, it's also driven by what is happening globally. I think India is relatively shining out with respect to what we see globally, and in most markets globally, we are seeing slowdown. So India kind of stands out and is one key significant large market where people want to invest, and especially from if one looks at foreign direct investment, again, we've seen a good flow in the Indian market. People do acknowledge, there are policy related challenges, but as long as, there is a response to those problems and we are resolving that, that is something that I think most people are building in their overall investment thesis, where they do believe, there are going to be policy and reforms that will be needed. And they are seeing them, in many areas, improvement and that coming through and the cycle time reducing. And that is something that they will expect even going forward. So in many of the emerging segments such as EV, battery, storage, I think globally itself, we are seeing a lot of policy evolution happening in many markets. So that is something that will be an important thing to watch out for, and we expect this to materialize even going forward. Clearly, the body language has kind of, changed, where they see good opportunity.
And another thing, a small supplementary question with this. Has the government also become more creative and more conscious about its responsibilities? Why I'm asking this is because my off-record conversation with the US Energy Secretary, something she projected a couple of times is that Indian government has started giving its annual trajectory for wind and solar assets, which really works a lot better with companies, because now they know how much capacities will come up for bidding, and they have a roadmap for at least 2 to 3 years, which helps them also, manage their investments. Do you think there's a conscious effort on part of the government also, look at these opportunities, give a more concrete roadmap to participants of the future? Do you think this really helps, or this is helping in uplifting the image of the country?
No, I think clearly in terms of the guidance, in terms of, where you want to take your capacities, I think in terms of targets, I think things have been well articulated. And even going forward, a lot has been said. And in the power sector, at least we see good amount of visibility. We are expecting close to, 300 gigawatts of capacity addition on the renewable side over the next few years, led by both solar and wind. So that articulation and the plans clearly helps. And also with respect to module manufacturing and PLI being very clear in terms of timeline, I think that articulation does help. Along with that, for green hydrogen, you have a 5 million ton kind of number for 2030. That again, articulation helps. And also in terms of storage capacity, again, there have been some targets that have been announced which are more shorter term. That again kind of, provides a lot more visibility. The key is, you should be able to deliver on those targets, and that commitment that is seen, that will continue to remain, the key thing, what we are able to deliver compared to what our plans are. So that is something to watch out for. But in general, I think the policy has been a lot more dynamic and reacting to a lot of, the environmental changes, the price changes, the price shocks that have been coming. So to that extent, I think there's a lot more visibility for an investor.
If you look at the other part, if you look at the surface transport sector, allow me a couple of minutes to, give a context to the question I wanted to ask. The Energy Transition Task Force, which was set up by Prime Minister under former Oil Secretary Tarun Kapoor, they said that all the million plus cities should do away with diesel vehicles by 2027. And they highlighted this with a large city. They said that this is needed. Now, when we look at surface transport, the biggest polluters are the diesel buses run by state transport corporations. Now, those buses are around 1.5 lakh. The state transport, and another 1.5 lakh is various run by private and others. If we speak with experts, recently I discussed with the transport commissioner in Delhi the problem they are facing while changing, electric buses. So charging stations an issue. So in transport sector, we have a lot of confusion. I don't have a right word. It's sort of a, bhindi bazaar kind of a deal where everyone is coming in. There's a lot of noise. There's a lot of words coming out. In this all confusion, do you see the sector, you look coming up and trying to tap those foreign investments? Because, for tapping foreign investments, you have to have a very clear pathway so that investors have a better view of what you intend to do. Maybe I'm not able to convey my question correctly to you, but there's a lot of confusion in transport sector. When we see it, the investments are going to go up, as you said, around 9.2 times to rupees 7 lakh crore. So where does the optimism for you come from?
I think from a government perspective, I think they have set up some sort of a clear target setting in terms of, them kind of wanting to transition towards electric vehicles going forward. And I think battery will play a very, very critical role in that transition journey. By 2030, I think we are expecting EV penetration to reach almost 30% across all segments. And we'll be happy to stand corrected if it accelerates even more. Some of the government numbers are much higher, more than 50%. So if that really materializes, which would mean, a large scale investment across the segment in charging infrastructure, in battery manufacturing, and also, we've already seen PLI linked incentives being offered in this area. So all these initiatives would mean, a larger scale of investments. On your specific points with respect to the utilities, buses, which are a very, very critical element in this entire piece because of the amount of diesel usage. So there have been incentive schemes provided at local state level with respect to procurement of electric buses. So in pockets we have seen some successes, but the challenges are fairly large. Funding this will be a challenge. Providing the charging infrastructure will be a challenge, and there is always a very, very critical element in the center state alignment for many of these projects. Often is a challenge. So we are hopeful that some of these challenges will be slowly overcome. Some feasible, sensible solutions will be found out, because sustainability is a very key agenda for almost all the large major cities, municipal corporations, and buses is a very, very important element. So there are no easy answers. Hopefully, with the challenges that come about, there can be dynamic policy response, both at the center and state level, and how quick that response is likely to determine, how quickly we move towards that path.
No, that's a great summing up. There are no easy answers for transport. That could be my takeaway. But the intent from the government now is serious. And why I'm asking is that you mentioned about the financial issues with state transport corporations, and the fact that the government is talking about a risk protection fund for e-buses, underscores that point. The center state thing, I will also discuss it later with you, because one of the issues will be center state chemistry. But do you think there is more seriousness coming from both center and states on greening the transport sector?
No, I think we clearly will see a lot more action from the center in case, the states don't move. Some sort of financial support is clearly coming through. I mean, on the lines of what we see in the power sector, again, there are incentive linked schemes which promote improving the operational discipline of the state utilities, at the same time providing them concessional funding, and with a higher role of, multilateral development banks also providing some funding is something that we expect, the center to kind of, try their best to kind of, channelize funds in this area and provide adequate funds, because we all know the challenges that some of the local bodies face in this area. So I think it's clearly a WIP. Now the pace and the movement of this will be a function of, how we are able to kind of, deliver on many of these aspects going forward.
One small question on this. The G20 is discussing the role of multilateral development banks, and so much is being talked about it. Do you think such conversations and exercises will open up more investment options for developing countries like India?
No, absolutely. I think there has been clearly push from India, and in terms of reforms in the multilateral development banks. Clearly, from a speed point of view, the approval process point of view, and also funding availability and allocation point of view. I think there are some reforms that are being spoken about, and you are well aware of the push from India. Now, if some of these things materialize and we see improved efficiency in terms of the funding flow from multilateral banks, that will remain a very, very key critical element, not just for India, but rest of the world, to kind of support in the net zero and the decarbonization plans globally, not just for India.
So Rahul, the first part that I had conceptualized was with basis of your thoughts on how these investment processes and all are moving. And now the second part I thought would devote to challenges, because the CRISIL report which you presented, one of the things which is lists is environmental clearances and approval delays as a high severity of impact. If you could shed more light on what are the operational problems that players are facing with respect to environment and approval, because one thing about environment and forest clearances is, it relates to a coal mine. The linkage has been given to Rajasthan, but the forest clearances by Chhattisgarh, where the mine is, has not been given, and hence the coal supply to Rajasthan is stretched. So such things keep happening. Because since you meet people across the spectrum, for investment to companies to analysts, what do you think are the practical problems that are being faced?
So I think one practical problem that is being faced is again linked to center state alignment, and at a central as well as the state level. I think the approval process has to be intertwined, streamlined, and much faster for players to get approvals. You mentioned mining related issues. More often than not, the way we are seeing in the road sector, I think projects have been bidded out post getting some of the clearances. Some of those kind of practices have to be kind of ensured in most of the other sectors too. Land acquisition is another very important aspect where the state has a very, very critical role to play. So it's very important for critical projects. I think there are some alternatives found, or some other way which ensures the projects don't get stalled and the money midway doesn't get stuck. And in the beginning itself, if land acquisition issues are sorted pre-awarding of projects, that will be something that is clearly a WIP, and it's an important area of focus, and it will be an important challenge as the scale of your project keeps on going up. If I can just also highlight, a couple of other issues with respect to center-state alignment. I think on the power sector side, you clearly see issues with respect to open access rules, and many of the discoms facing challenges, and open access not being as easily available as the center would like, because of financial issues at the discom level. Then there are issues with respect to cross subsidies, surcharges, and also availability of green power. I mean, if there are any central level guidance, some of the utilities will have to kind of incorporate all of that, and many of these will need to work smoothly. And there, wherever possible, center will have to kind of make sure that the states are well aligned and their financial models are viable, so that many of these transitions can take place more smoothly.
Not directly related with this, Rahul, but wanted to understand, when we look at states profile, there are states like Telangana which are doing tremendously well in terms of investments across, not just in green side but others. Then there are states like, not taking in a political sense, but like Bihar and others, where investments are still stretched. Do you think even state governments need to take really serious efforts to ramp up their profiles?
Absolutely. That's a very, very important point. So, in order to ensure progress and faster growth in their economy and faster rise in income levels of the populace there, it's very important that the states encourage investments. And those investments can again be encouraged by the actions that are taken. And I think from the central government side, I think there you have seen, examples of competitive federalism, where they have tried to promote ranking of states, etc. So some of these initiatives are very important, and I think those are initiatives that we as a nation should continue to kind of push, and hopefully people will see the merit in some of these initiatives, and accordingly that will be very critical to channelize investment.
That's really great, explaining it really in very simple terms for at least someone like me to understand. Won't take much of your time. Last question, Rahul, and I think this is something which is very close to your heart, because when we last met on the release of the report, you were speaking about the green financing and how's it. Could you take our listeners down what is happening in terms of green financing? Because you also spoke about bonds and how India can attract those. If you could give our listeners a small explainer on, in the sense that where is green financing right now, when India is trying to attract it, are we doing the right things to attract green financing? And if not, what should be done by the government and the industry to attract more green financing?
See, on the green financing front, I think it's going to become a very, very important issue. As you saw, we are looking at fairly large investments on the green side, close to, 36 lakh crores over the next 6-7 years. And if I look at the lay of the land in the past, infrastructure in the government has been financed by a mix of, banks, NBFCs, or from the government side, as well as the bond market. Even going forward, I think these will be the three key areas which will be critical to kind of fund infrastructure. Now, if one looks at the green infrastructure finance, I think globally we see a lot of funds being available, both from sovereign as well as the private side, which are interested in investing in green assets. Those are purpose-driven funds, also pension funds, retirement funds, which are kind of looking in that space. We have seen some of the domestic corporates on the renewable energy side raise funds globally. Close to 20 billion of outstanding bonds have been raised globally. Now, in order to mainstream and channelize and expand this market even further, I think it's very critical that Indian companies comply with some of the sustainability linked reporting requirements. The government on its side is kind of, pushing that through the BRSR getting implemented for the top 1,000 corporates, and increasingly with the supply chain and other disclosures becoming more streamlined and aligned with some of the global reporting standards. Clearly, there'll be more and more data available for investors to take those specific calls. And of course, there needs to be a lot more work that we needed from the taxonomy perspective. RBI, on its part, from a banking channel, is also looking at incorporating climate risk as part of its overall, assessment of banks. So banks will also need to look at, climate risk, as well as through BRSR will also have to look at their financed emissions very closely. So assuming some of these pieces fall in place from a banking sector side also, given the opportunity and the size of investments, it will be an important element to kind of drive growth for the banks. So overall, as we move over the next few years, we are expecting the banks to contribute close to 7.5 to 8 lakh crore in this area out of the overall funding. Additionally, we also expect a larger role from PFC, REC, NAPFID to fund the green infrastructure part, because they clearly have been identified by the government to kind of, accelerate funding, which is long term in nature, to be available. Finally, through the bond market development, we've already seen the sovereign bond market issuance, sovereign green bond issuances, where of close to 16,000 crores last year. Going forward, we expect that market to accelerate, not just for the sovereign, but even for the private sector, and start to become an important element. And with the reporting rules and regulations being more and more streamlined, that will be one very critical area. And most of the infrastructure investments are long-term in nature, which will require, support from a long-term bond market. And here again, we see role of the pension fund, retirement fund, insurance companies, as well as the mutual funds, which again have been seeing good inflows from the domestic investors. All of these funds together, will get channelized and hopefully can deepen the bond market. And we could see some green investment, though in terms of pricing, there has not been much of an advantage till now. But with a more deepening market and more maybe, tax incentives getting offered on the margin, it may become an important source of funding going forward.
No, thank you so much, Rahul, for breaking down the financing part, something I really don't understand. It becomes quite technical. But if I have to ask you one parting last question, you see optimism going ahead in the medium and long term when we look at, greening the infrastructure and, upscaling it?
No, absolutely. I think clearly all the right building blocks are being put in place. And we are very confident that if India has to grow, you cannot leave aside the issue of sustainability. Though we will not do away with coal-based power capacities, they will be also needed. But one will have to take a balanced view, and wherever possible, one would need to incorporate sustainability as well as climate considerations in terms of the infrastructure build out, and all building blocks and ingredients are in place to make sure that that happens.
And what, according to you, would be a key monitorable in this situation?
I think the key monitorable would be the pace of policy reforms. This will challenge the government as well as the private sector in terms of technology, in terms of policies, in terms of being continuously at it, and doing reforms on an ongoing basis is something that will be very critical, be it on the funding side, on-ground implementation side, state center related, issues, technology related issues. So all of them will need to be addressed on a dynamic basis.
Thank you so much, Rahul, for breaking it down so simply. I hope our listeners will get a real good insights out of it. Thank you so much for sparing time and speaking to us on the Business Line podcast.
Thank you.